3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the Bible in One. I knew it was coming, man. I knew you were going to go high. Should we carry on?
Yeah.
Welcome to the Bible in 1 Year podcast, brought to you by two Brits and a Bible. Today's 63, covering Deuteronomy 14, 15, and 16.
In Deuteronomy 14, Moses speaks to Israel about laws regarding cutting your body, eating unclean animals, and giving and using tithes. In Deuteronomy 15, Moses speaks to Israel regarding laws of hospitality, debt cancellation, and the release of slaves after 7 years. And in Deuteronomy 16, Moses speaks to Israel of laws regarding feasts of Passover. Well, that was the choppiest intro we've done. I could almost see it being a teaser and then an intro.
It might just be a 2 for 1.
Yeah, as a lot of the listeners, faithful listeners, know, I try and get Adam to laugh basically before almost every podcast, and sometimes I'm successful. I was really successful this time.
Maybe the intro can just be you're trying to make me laugh, the teaser, and that'll just lead into the intro where I'm laughing. I think that's what's going to happen.
That's embarrassing for me, but yes,
we'll all right, let's jump in then. Tiny little point first of all. Deuteronomy 14:13. I just love the fact that it mentions the red kite, because where Boov and I grew up, they recently reintroduced red kites to the Chilterns, and it took off very well. So literally, and both the bird and the population. So love that. And also references Deuteronomy 14:18. Don't eat bats. So thanks, COVID. Says in the Bible, don't eat bats.
Yeah, I love that. And I think you should do the tithing one as well, because you've got a third little, you're working on your comedy, your type 5. So you've done the red kites flying, don't eat bats. Let's finish it off with the third one.
I just was like, what do you mean? No, sorry. I was like, yeah, so we're talking 14, 22 to 29, speaking about tithing, and effectively there, oh man, I typed the wrong type of there, and you didn't correct me on it. T-E-A-T-H-E-I, oh no, not even I-R. Why I put, what a mare I've had there. Means nothing to anyone watching this, but I knew. They are to give alms on top of giving to God to help out the Levites and stuff. Obviously, the alms being over and above your tithe to support the poor. And I call them brothers in arms.
It's actually a really good little, oh no. This is why some of you need to watch the YouTube occasionally if you're on Spotify or wherever else you are, just for moments like that. You're missing out on that. But anyway, yeah, that's definitely your type 5. I've genuinely seen worse type 5s at comedy shows than what I just got from you. So thank you for that. Hopping over to me, completely not a segue, but a lot of commentary on things that perhaps link to safety. I think I've talked about this before, the idea that the uncooked pork and the uncooked shrimp would have been really bad and even caused illness and death, of course. So some of it is practical, some of it is way above our pay grades as human beings in the face of God. But I just love that. Deuteronomy 15, I love the concept of resetting debt every 7 years. I think that's something that came out of Deuteronomy 14, 15, and 16 a lot for me, and convicting to me, was just being more generous in my spirit, giving more freely, that sort of thing. And the idea of resetting debt every 7 years, I think, is such a great idea. It's something that we haven't lived up to as societies, even in the West, with all of our wealth. But there are literally people who get into a debt cycle that they pretty much never get out of.
Yeah, I mean, that's student debt a lot of the time. I'm still paying off a student debt. I'm not sure I am. I don't think I've hit a income threshold where I needed to, which is great. But it's just grown, right? They haven't cancelled that in 7 years. It's going to be like triple the size. But one thing that I found I took away from that is, it speaks about being generous in not adding interest and stuff to when you're lending, but also there's a slight weight and responsibility for the person that is in debt not to abuse that. It would be very easy to be like, oh, I'll pay you back next month, next year, etc., knowing full well that in 7 years it's going to be written off, as opposed to trying your best to pay off that debt. And if you're unable to do it, then the rest gets sort of cancelled. But it's like an honesty thing on both camps, really, not to add the interest when you are lending and not to take the piss when you're borrowing,
Yeah. What I thought about that just now. Actually, I didn't say this before, but because I didn't think of it, it's also, I suppose, you're more likely to be held accountable and honourable in a smaller society like this, where it's a very tight knit community. Because otherwise, you'd be like, that that Bob, he always nicks my money and he never pays it back. Let's not lend to him next time.
Yeah.
So, but then that also maybe links a little bit to you may require payment from a foreigner, but you must cancel any debt your fellow Israelite owes you. So that tight-knit community, but also, I suppose, foreigners, it's a bit like loaning money today, right? A bank needs your certain information about you because you're a foreigner to them. You're a stranger. You don't know whether you're reliable or not. So, so that there's some wisdom in
True.
that.
I found it pretty interesting as well then, because it goes on to say in 15 verse 4, how there never need to be any poor person among you, for the land your Lord your God is giving you to possess as your inheritance. He will richly bless you. Though later on, literally in that same chapter, in verse 11, it says there will always be poor people in the land. And so God's saying that there never needs to be poor people among you, but there'll always be poor people. And you and I obviously were just chatting off air, and effectively that can sound like a contradiction, but actually we read into, or sort of just chewed it over a little bit. And what God is saying, we believe, is that God will always provide enough for everyone. It's up to human beings to distribute that evenly, which we fall so short on so frequently, because there's more poverty today, I think, than there's ever been. Yet there's probably more wealth than there's ever been. And so, God has provided us a world that will richly provide everything that we need to, provided we treat it well, for everybody living on it. The greed that comes from so many people just prevents that from happening. And it's such a state we're in.
What's really scary as well is that there are also lots of wealthy people who are still very generous. And yet even that generosity is unfortunately in this broken world, wasted. So I remember my dad telling me a story about all of this food that was collected to take over to part of the developing world, I think a country in Africa. And the corrupt government basically said, well, it's better for us if the people just starve. So there were just these silos of food that just rotted away, and all these starving people outside that could have benefited from it. So again, that just shows exactly what you're saying. There will always be poor people among you, because unfortunately we're all broken sinners, and some of the people in power in particular, it's not in their interest to actually have generosity, equality, people having enough. It's that disparity that keeps the system going. It's not good.
And that segues into what you were going to say as well about the pastor dude that came into our primary school.
Oh, thank you for reminding me. Yeah, so Adam and I, he already did a shout out to Bucks with the red kites, but so we went to a school called LCCS, Little Chalfont County Combined. Whoop whoop. And Adam doesn't remember any of the sermons or little teachings, interestingly, whereas I, for some reason, remember at least some of them. One of them was a picture of hell versus a picture of heaven. And the pastor, I think he was a pastor, said hell will be, there's a buffet table full of food and everyone will have long arms and they'll all be trying to feed themselves for eternity, but they won't be able to because their long arms will mean they can't get the food in their mouth. Whereas heaven would be that everyone still has long arms and there's a big buffet table, but everyone will be helping each other and feeding each other with their long arms. And I just thought that was a really sweet way of explaining generosity and sin of greed, particularly to whatever we were, 6 years old.
It's really cool. The irony is, for my wife, that would be her idea of hell, because she doesn't like when other people feed her things. But while we're talking about sort of food, I'm going to segue very loosely here into, it talks in Deuteronomy 16 about the month of Aviv, and that month being the month of harvest. And interestingly enough, that month could be moved each year depending on when the harvest arrives. Just because they didn't need the same calendar that we do, but they needed it to be based on when their food arrives. And I actually Googled it, and actually Aviv is depicted as spring, from the Hebrew word for greenness. So I liked that.
I really love it when you do a bit of research on stuff and you get things like that, because that's really cool. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot more time. One quick thing, just the whole thing of bribes and not accepting bribes, I think is interesting. Maybe
we'll touch on that tomorrow as well. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. Insta at 2 Brits and a Bible.
And please consider liking and subscribing to help spread the word of God.